To recap a little bit, we looked at the language of motion and the way and how we can discover that in a practical way. We looked at lighting and how that interacts with people and their perceptions. And then we got into the Canon project, which is kind of trying to create a huge database that brings all this information and documentation together. The main reason for that is that most people write a thesis somewhere in their life. And what do we do with all these theses?
Nothing.
Yes, we put them somewhere nice in a library, in a box, and after a while they get in a box in the cellar, and nothing happens with it. I'm trying to track a lot of these theses, and sometimes you find a fantastic thesis from the 60s, where somebody describes of course the thesis is not perfect, that's not the point, but it gives you another view. It gives you a view from that time to the reality that is there, which is a different view than we have now. History is not an abstract thing like this is true and this is the way it works. It's always an interpretation. I give you one example. I had a big discussion with a theater magazine in Belgium, and they only write about the high-tech theater, the modern theater, the new things, and so on. But they never write about amateur theater. They never write about commercial theater, and so on. And I said, yes, because this is the art. But the problem is that you're falsifying history at that point, because you're missing part of the environment where this high-tech contemporary theater was going on. So they were a bit shocked that I said that, but I like to shock people from time to time, so that's quite fine. So to try to write, but also have these views from the past, views from different countries, views from whatever, and bring that together. That's a bit the core thing of Canon base. Now, the problem is, of course, then you get a huge amount of information, and after a while you get lost. It's a bit, if you were in the Renaissance, for example, and you had a library, which often meant 20 or 30 books, then you were the elite, because you had access to information. The problem now is we have access to masses of information, but the elite becomes the people that are able to find out the right information. Because if you search something, you get 10,000 results, and you have to figure out what the right one is. So the new elite is not the people that have access to information, but people that are able to select within this information and writing. And that's a bit what we try to help people. On top of that, in some cases, information is hidden. And for me, it's still the nicest example is at one point I was looking at something, and there is a book popping up from the 1900s about air conditioning. I think this is odd, because I was looking up something on gaslighting, I think, and I get a book on air conditioning. I said, what? And it's a book, 3,000 pages, about air conditioning in buildings. There was a new concept around 1900, air conditioning, and I think, why does this pop up? So I start searching further, and I find that in this 3,000 pages, there is about 20 pages about air conditioning in theatre. But still, why does that pop up when I'm looking for gaslight? And then I find that there is a page and a half, which is about the air conditioning you need for gaslight to kind of have the air clean enough to be able to survive in the theatre. I figured out later that I found this by a typo. In my search, I made a mistake. I typed something wrong, and that's how it popped up, because the book was OCR'd in a quite bad way, and the same typo occurred in this book. So the chance that you find that when you're researching a thing like that is very rare. What we do is when we find something like that, we put it in a database with structured data behind. So we make it accessible for the people that are looking into the subject, and we link it to a subject. That's basically a bit the idea behind it. And there is a lot of stuff in there. We'll have a look later on. And we structure information so it's findable. That's a bit the core of what we are doing. Now, the technical solution we use for that is Wikidata, which is you have the wiki organization, and they have Wikimedia where they store all their videos and pictures and that type of stuff. You have all the wiki pages. And then they also have a data version. Their original idea was that every wiki page would have a link into the Wikidata, so you could see for the different languages what you would find about the same subject. That was basically the idea. At the same time, collections and museums started to put their stuff in with links to their unique pages. And bit by bit it grew like a huge database. I think there is 45 million entries in there or something like that. It's quite huge. It's a bit chaotic because everybody started doing stuff, and so they use sometimes 4 different properties to say the same thing. And now bit by bit there is groups cleaning out all this. For example, there is a group working which is called LODEPA worldwide that are cleaning out the information about theaters. There is about 12,000 theaters in there or something like that. But you have to find them because sometimes it's a theater, sometimes it's called the cultural center, sometimes it's called the city theater. So they're cleaning that out so that if you search for a city theater, you find exactly every theater that fits that definition. So, but on top of that, Wikipedia, next to the fact that they collect all this information and they work together with all these people, also their software is open source. It means if you want, you can download software. Well, you need a little bit of IT knowledge, but you can download the wiki version and put that online on your own server and work on that so there you use the software but not their content. And the same thing happens with this Wikidata. There is even you don't need always to download it. If you want to experiment with it, you can go to Wikidata Cloud or something like that, and there you can have a limited version to test stuff out. That's what we do from time to time. If we're experimenting, we use that, and then we empty it again. So everything is open. It's not only the content, it's also the software. And we decided to use this software. Why not work directly in their main framework? Is because there is a community behind, and you have to convince them every time if you want to make a new property. And that takes quite a long time because people from all over the world can comment on it and you have to discuss. And if you have only a 3-year project, that slows down too much your project. So that's the reason why we did it separately. But we use Wikidata as a backup. Everything that we make, we try to link to what is in Wikidata. So if ever we would stop with this, we can dump the information into the Wikidata system. That's a bit our idea. Now, another problem is that it's pure data in the way it says date, this, it's not text. And we discovered that for some things we really need text. Sometimes if you want to explain something, if you want to make it nice, you rather want the text than just pure data. So we decided to integrate, and we do the opposite thing of what they are doing. We integrate wiki pages into our data system, which means that the moment you look at it, it will search for a wiki page and it will show it on top, and then under it you will see all the data, which gives us the freedom to also describe things that you can't really describe in pure data relationships. Because data relationships are fantastic because they give you order and structure. But as we all know, theater is not always ordered and structured. So in some cases, you just have to say, you just want to say, yes, but this guy met this guy in a cafe, and they had a chat, and then the cooperation started, and then they went on. And that's a thing that's very hard to describe in pure relations. So therefore, we have also the open. Another thing we did is the wiki works like that it just, if you enter something, then it comes in a line. If you enter something later, then it comes in the line below. So the data is not organized. So I don't get all the dates together, I don't get all the whatever together. So what we did is we created a layer on top of that, where we structured this information in kind of a logical order as we want to see it. We believe strongly that if you give information to people, be it in text, be it in more a data structure, 50% of what you read is layout. And in the way that if you lay out something in a proper way, people will remember way better, will understand better, will know where the information is, and so on. So that's quite an important thing and we're still working on that, because in the new version we go way further. But we believe that that a layout also, even in a text, gives you a certain structure and a consequence in that. And with my colleague teachers, I have a test for that, and it's called the grey paper test. So if you write a text in a course or things like that, and you glue it on the wall there, and you still can see the structure of the text, then you have a good text. If it becomes kind of a grey paper, then probably there is a problem with your layout. So that if you start writing theses and stuff like that, glue it on the wall, see if it has a nice structure, and then you know that it's at least your layout is fine. Good, this in the side. What else did we do? We started to create all kind of functionalities. So normally if you describe a person, you only get the information of the person. It will sometimes link to other things. Let's say you have a designer, you describe the designer, and you say, has designed this production. It will link to this production, but on the side of the production, it will not show is designed by this person. So that's one of the things that we do. We make inverse properties so that you start seeing that. We do all kind of tools. I'll show some of them to make information more visible. So we kind of create something on top that makes it nicer to read while it's still a data form. Now to get all this information structured, the first thing was we had so much information, we had to organize it a little bit. And we organized that in two ways. In one way in the different fields. So you have architecture, you have, let's see, where is my notes? Yep. So architecture, costume, hair and makeup, general technology, lighting and projection, scenography, stage management, theater management, artistic production, and so on and so on and so on. So every field, you can select on every field. So that's one, that's the vertical side of the matrix. On the other hand, you have types of information. Are we talking about a person? Are we talking about an event, a manufacturer, a performance, a source, whatever, a theater? So in that way you already divide your information in a way that it's quite easy to find. I'm looking for a person in architecture, so there I will get all the architects together. That's a bit of it. And then on top of that you have overview pages. So we describe a lot of information that is country-based. So there we can say, give me everything from Italy. And then you will get the theaters, you will get the designers, you will get the whatever that is connected to the country, the organizations that are there, and so on, will all be in one page. Here we get an overview page of, and that is, the nice thing is that it's all generated automatically. So you don't need to adapt the map, you don't need to adapt time frame. If you change somewhere a date, it will pop up in the overview page. So let's have a simple look. We have a spotlight, and we can describe this spotlight, and we really describe that in a data form. Important is everything we do is multilingual. So that means that in theory, for all countries, we can make a description and a definition. Now, in the case of spotlights, that doesn't make much sense to have a description because it's just the brand and the type number. So that's multilingual by itself. So there we don't need to do it. But for example, in theater sometimes, the theater is called differently in different languages. So at that point you would get all the different languages together. We have a mother language, which is English, and the reason is you need at least one language that connects everything together, and then you get the translations of it. But we agreed that most of the information we put in English and in the original language. So ideally, if I write something about the theater in Italy, the English and the Italian will be filled. All the others can be filled, but that's not absolutely necessary. Good. And you get all kind of descriptions. We work a lot with visualizations. That's maps, that's timelines, that's tree structures, to get this mass of information together. You have to imagine there is about, I think we are about 14,000 theaters in there now. If I would just put them there only by their names, that would become quite messy. Because there is a lot of theaters that are called city theater. There is a lot of theaters that are called Scala. There is a lot of theaters that are called Odeon. So to be able to do that, we put them in structures that make it easier. Let's have a quick look at that. We're working on a new version, but the concept stays the same. So for example, for theaters, we can put them all in a timeline, and it will give you all the information we have. So it will tell you when they start building, when they had the official opening, when they burn down, when they burn down again, when they burn down for the third time. There is one that has burned down 7 times. When they refurbish the theater, when they are destroyed by a war or something. The terrible thing is that I'm now, even if we talk about history, on a regular basis have to update also the theaters that are destroyed now in different wars. It's a bit scary that the day after it's destroyed, you're kind of writing history, but okay, it is what it is. And we give all these dates. Depending on the size that you want to see, you will also get the surrounding dates. For example, this is a timeline of a lot of different theaters, I think from a city or no. But if you look at one theater, it will give you all the dates of the theater, but it will also look at the surrounding information, which means, for example, the architects that are in there, they're also described somewhere else. They have a birth date, they have a date they died. So these dates are also graphed and put in the same graph, which helps a lot because architects have the bad habit to do the same thing as their father and to have the same name as their father. So sometimes you see, oh, this theater is built there with that architect. That's quite impossible because the guy died already before they started building. And then you can look at, okay, no, it's another one. So we try to look at, okay, what's the information you need if you look at this subject and to bring all that together. And the timelines help quite a lot because then you also can see the follow-up from one to another. As you see, sometimes an architect that builds like 7 theaters and you say he improves his idea about the theater. So there you get all these relationships. And as I told in the beginning, the essence is not the dates, it's the relations between all these things. Or a theater is a copy of a theater in another country. So which one was first? Or which idea was first? And where did they steal all these good ideas? We have a similar thing for equipment, and there you have a timeline and you also have kind of a structure to divide this technical information, because only spotlights, there is like 400, and we divide them in a way that you find them back. We look at the first use, we look when they were produced, when they stopped the production, so you get kind of an overview of what every spotlight is. And that's, for theaters, it's quite easy, because with a little bit of searching you find a lot of information about theaters. For spotlights it's terrible. And the reason is, what is the information we use often is, for example, catalogs. And one of the problems with catalogs is they never have a date on them. And that has a good reason. If you put a date on a catalog and you try to sell the same equipment next year, you're selling old-fashioned equipment. So that's the reason why they never put dates on catalogs. You get pictures from theaters, and then hopefully you know when they're refurbished, and then you can trace that back. But the best source we use is magazines. We have a large base of magazines, and there we look into the publicity, because Spotlight, when they start creating it, we look at, okay, where is the first time when there was publicity, then that was the moment they started to create it. And sometimes the dates are not exact, but the idea is that if somebody else comes later on and says this is not correct because they already bought one there before what you said, they update it. So it's not all the information is perfectly exactly right, but it is as correct as possible. And we hope that other people look into it and say, oh no, but this is not completely correct. So you can see when they are made, and they're divided in kind of a logical order. For theaters, you have the same thing. We all put them on a map. So where possible, if we have the GPS coordinates, we enter these. If we don't have them, we try to look them up. It becomes more difficult with theaters that don't exist anymore, that are sometimes in neighborhoods that don't exist anymore. There we have to figure out where it is. Or they have an old address, in the way that the street is still existing, but the street used to be called differently in the past. So then it starts to get some search work, but for most of them we can find that. So that's one way of showing the information. You see that Italy is quite well done in theaters. On the other hand, I must also say, you see that there is a strong focus on that part of Europe. The reason is also that the first projects were countries from that neighborhood. So that also meant that they had access to information that was only in one language, so they brought that in. And it's more difficult, for example, probably there is way more theaters in Russia, but it's hard to find them because it's hard to search for them. They're not so much online. The books there are for me, very difficult to read. So we really need local people also to adapt. We're talking about the main theaters, but there is also all the small theaters and the community things. Sometimes they're well documented, but sometimes they are documented, like in France, they're documented in one province, they're documented very well. In another province, you hardly find anything. So that's a bit hard to do, but bit by bit, we add. And very strange and shocking for a lot of academics, my main source to update information is Facebook. In the sense that I'm part of a group of people like archiving technical theater history. It's about 5,000 people that are all interested in this subject, that all have been working in the sector, and they have a lot of knowledge in their heads. So if I have something that I can't identify and I put a picture online, after half an hour, I not only get, okay, it's this equipment, but I also get the catalog that they still had, and they never managed to scan. And now they're scanning it because somebody is asking for it. They tell the story about, we had the prototype in our theater. So that's a rich source. And it's a quality source. It's not, the problem with Facebook, it's just a container, but it depends a lot on the group you're looking at. There is a fantastic group that is looking on the history of painted scenery, for example. There is like 15, 20 groups that are really, and if you think we are nerds, there are people that are only collecting light bulbs. And they discuss if this light bulb was made for the first time in the first half of 1920 or in the last part of 1920. That's the type of discussion you have there. So yeah, you have to get a little bit through this nerdy thing. So that's one thing I can ask them. And the second thing is they all do research and they put some stuff of their research, and then I think, oh, that's interesting. This talking about this theater, is the theater in there? So it's for me kind of a check also to get that and to have access to a huge community. And that's the important part. And because they're mostly older people, Facebook works better than TikTok. Let's say it that way. But anyway, and next to that, of course, we have all the traditional sources where we work on, and I get back to that, how we deal with that. So you see, this is an old version because it says 11,000, there is now 14,000 theaters. Now, how do we do that to enter with a small group of people with a quite limited budget? How do we enter 11 or 14,000 theaters in there? It's impossible. So we found a way of working which is called harvesting. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at existing sources, which is often websites. It's the people that describe all the theaters of their country, for example. Or people describing all historical theaters. Or people describing architecture, where there is a lot of theaters in there. And then I have this crazy guy in the Czech Republic, and he's an expert in grabbing. So I give him a website, and I said the information is there. And then he starts programming a little bit, and then a day later I get a list with all these theaters, with all the information that he could select. And one thing is that sometimes it's just data and he can read the data. In some cases, he just reads the layout, because people make a website and they make a nice title for each theater, and then they use another format for the date and another format. And he's able to recognize these things and put that in a kind of an Excel file. And then we check the Excel file and we see what we already have, and we merge everything together. So you sometimes, for some theaters, I only have the name and the city. That's about it. And then the next time you're grabbing something, and suddenly it pops up 2 dates from an architect. And bit by bit we do that in kind of mass. So it goes from existing lists that it depends. For the theaters, it's a lot of existing lists. For the terminology that is in the database, we used theater words. And theater words was a little booklet they started making in the 80s with theater terminology in 40 languages. Bit by bit, they got more languages. It was a paper booklet. At the end, they made a digital version, and then they stopped because, well, they say people look up stuff. We got access to this database, and we imported this whole database, and that became our terminology base, which had the advantage that we already had all these different languages. We use a lot of the magazines of professional organizations, because if a new theater opens, they will describe that, and they will describe that not only from an architectural point of view, but also from a functionality point of view, because they're professional magazines. They will tell you about this is a good theater, and there the acoustics is very nice, and so on. So there we get more information from that. And then all kind of online sources and so on. And we kind of try to grab that in mass. Now the problem is, if it's digital, that's quite easy, but at one point you get to written information in the book. And luckily, often the older books are all scanned, because a lot, well, you have the archive.org, it's amazing. These guys are able to scan books at the speeds of almost a container, so a sea container, a day. They're so automated because there is so much coming in that they really can use huge quantities of books. Most of the books, if they're not too fragile and so on, they're scanned completely automatically. They go in a machine, they're photographed, they're opened, and they're scanned completely, and nobody has to touch them. Amazing, amazing thing. So there, okay, it's in a book format, but again, the guy then takes the text out of it and analyzes it based on the layout and so on. And often he can kind of grab all the information out of a book. So he analyzes the book and he ends up with an Excel file, not by going through the book, but by just programming and analyzing system. Now we have to program that, but in the future we are looking for a system where we can do that through an AI application. We are all very critical about AI, especially because we're in a niche field. And nice example there is that if you look at sound and you ask something to an AI model about sound, the quality of your answer will be way better than if you ask something about historic lighting. And the reason is simple. There is way more written about sound. Because you have sound in theater, but you also have all the festival thing, you have the musicians, you have the home sound, you have radio and television that use sound. So there's way more written than about lighting. And then the result is very bad if you talk about that. You get some very general things like, yes, people used candles. Well, I knew that already. That was not a real new thing. What we want to do is we have all our sources together in a big box, and we want to train a model not to look at the internet, but to only look at our own sources and give us answers. So that's why we're also gathering as much magazines as possible in it. Even if they're available online, we copy them in our repository, so we are able to train models on that. So that will facilitate our work, because otherwise it will be impossible to do all this. But this is an old thing, because we're over 2000 now. I think there's more accurate figures later. But it gives you an idea of the amount of people, and also persons, for example. Some of them are just the author of an article, and it will say, this person from that country was author of that. That's the information we have. If later on we find out that he also designed something, then we update the information. That's a bit the idea. Good. Do we collect everything? No. Because then we would be describing the world, which is a fantastic idea, but which would take a little bit too long. Not only that, but it would also become very vague. Because now we have kind of a clear focus, which is the performing arts and events. If you would go further, then at the end you're describing politics and whatever, then you don't have focus anymore, and then you lose the quality. So we describe what's in our field, and we always take the information we need to visualize. So even if the information somewhere else, we will have the GPS coordinates, we will have all the dates, because we need them to make this all different types of graphics. While for the rest, we often don't keep all this information, but we just refer to it. If it's information that is not essential to us, we just refer to another place where you can find it. That's a bit the way we try to deal with it. And we limit our field a bit, and that becomes a discussion now in the next project. But we limit our field to the technical, everything which is backstage. So all the technical. So in principle, we don't describe productions. Why? Because there is other people doing that very well. There is a lot of databases about productions in different countries. You can find them back quite easily. You have the guys from the Ibsen Institute, for example, that have documented all Ibsen performances, not only productions, but performances all over the world that have ever been played. So you can literally see in that city, on that date, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they played an Ibsen play. And they can do all kind of statistics on that, because that's their job. So why would we do that again? The only thing we do is we refer to them. And we refer to the different places where these things are documented. And I think that's more reasonable, because then we can focus on the technical production part. Good. Another thing that we do is that if we think the information is in danger, then we try to copy as much as possible, and we put it in kind of a backup format. So we make it invisible, but if anything would go wrong, we would still be able to grab it back. That's what we do, for example, with magazines. We get magazines from a professional organization, for example. They also have them online in their own system, so we refer to their online version, but we keep a backup copy, because organizations die. They stop at one point, and then everything is gone. and then we have a backup that we can replace to the original. But we always try to refer to the original source until the original source disappears. That's more or less what we try to do. Good. Now I'm going to be a little bit technical for an early Saturday morning. But I'm going to try to explain a little bit this concept of open link data. It's a bit technical, you don't need to get all the details, but the conceptual thing is quite interesting. The first thing, it's open. Everybody can use it. It's publicly available, and where possible we have creative licenses or similar in the way that also states, especially for photos or for videos or so on, we say, okay, the people that put pictures in our database, they agree that everybody can use them with the limit that they can't be commercially used, which means you can use them in your thesis, you can use them in your teaching, you can use them in public presentations, not a problem at all. You can use them for research, but if you would publish them in a book, you have to ask us. That's a bit the idea. Because we're absolutely happy that, that everybody can use it. The problem is if it's published in a book, then you get the opposite thing that said you're not allowed to publish this picture anymore because it's in my book. So to avoid that, we kind of do this. So it's all open, which is a huge advantage, which also can lead to a little bit of chaos. Because in some cases there is discussions, like there was a huge discussion going on, like a theater that claimed, I'm the oldest theater of this country. And then somebody else from this country said, yeah, no, it's not true because it was not really a theater. Our theater is the oldest of the country. And then you get this kind of up and down. The nice thing is that that type of things are well organized in the structure because you can have a discussion on a topic. That's one thing, so people can say, I don't agree with this for this and this and this reason, and somebody else can answer, and we have a moderator. And on top of that, if they secretly change stuff, you can see that because every page has a history. And I can say, oh no, go back to that date, because you messed up stuff. We don't, or undo this change. So in that way, it's well structured. The only thing is to follow up all this information of people. The more people you get, the more you need to work on that to keep it clean and organized. It's linked because we're not having everything in one place, but we link to other databases. So, for example, the archive of La Scala is working with the Hyperstage project on documenting their productions. That's a separate database. We can link to that because they have a unique number, I have a unique number. I put their unique number in my database and it can read from their database and show it in mine without having to store it. Which is fantastic because if they change something, it updates it automatically in my views. So it's linked, and on the other hand, they are not really documenting theaters, but they say that there is a production here that played in that theater. They can link to mine. And then if people want to know more about that theater, they can just click on it and go to my database, or they can have the basic information, grab it from mine and show it in their views. And that's the whole idea after this open linked thing, in the sense that ideally you would connect hundreds of databases together and you get way more stronger information. I know there is some people working now on the technical writers of theaters, for example, to make a structure to document them. And in that way, every theater could update their own information and all the others could look at it. But imagine for production people, with operas it's a bit different because you know the size of an opera and so on. But for theater productions, you go from theaters with a stage of 7.5 wide to theaters that have a stage of 20 wide. And it would help a lot for production people, for example, say make me a selection of all theaters that are 10 meters deep, at least 8 meters wide, and that can seat an audience of 300 people. And you would do way less mailing because you can mail focusly. or where you have this and this and this equipment. You need a flight tower. Okay, so you could select on that. That's a bit their idea. The issue that we have is that we also want, if you change something in your theater, that you keep the old information, and that's a bit of a fight, because they say, yeah, it messes up the information. That's true partly, but on the other hand, you would generate automatically historic information. That's a bit. Now, that's a bit the difference with how we dealt with databases in the past. In the past, you had one box, and in the box you had several folders. You had a folder for people, and a folder for theaters, and a folder for that. And it was all in one box, and it would generate one output. Which means that if you want something else, you have to reprogram the whole thing. With the whole idea of open link data, is you have all these different data sets. And you can create yourself a query. You can say, I want all theaters that are in this country, and that the countries come from one side, that have this equipment that comes from another database where this person ever has worked, whatever you want to imagine. You write a query, in fact a structured search, and you get the answer. And if somebody else does another query, you will get another answer. So that's a bit the advantage, is you can use all the information that is gathered everywhere, bring that together, and make a result that is unique for you. And that's quite an important advantage. Now, a very difficult thing when I work with people that are new in this thing is they think we put words in there. In the way, if you put the name of a person, or the name of a type of equipment, let's say, they say, oh, that's a word I put in there. But in fact, it's not true. We're not documenting words. We're documenting concepts. Because we have, especially in theater, a very difficult language with a lot of bad habits. And one of the very bad habits is we use the same word for different things, and we use different words for the same thing. Which is rather annoying, and even if you're traveling a little bit, even just in Italy, you'll see that the thing that is called whatever here is called different on the other side of Italy. So, working with words is not a good thing. What we try to do is, in fact, we document the concept. If I say, it is a hammer, which is a word I understand, the concept, in fact, is something with a heavy, hard thing on one side and a stick on the other, so I can have a leverage to get nails in. That's a universal. If I see that, however you call that, I will understand that's a hammer. Which also means that in another language it would be called different, and so on. For hammers, that's quite easy. For stage managers, for example, that is extremely difficult, because in some countries they call the stage manager the caller, the guy that gives the cues. In other countries, the stage manager is the head of the technical departments that are on stage. In Sweden, they have two stage managers, a house stage manager and a company stage manager. In the musicals, stage manager is something different than in rock and roll, and is something different than in theater. So there, the idea of describing a concept is extremely important, and also describing the boundaries of a concept. Because yes, we talked about the hammer, but you have like 100 different types of hammers. Okay, at one point you have to say, yes, I know this is the one with the red dot, but that doesn't make any difference. This is the same concept. The same we do with stage managers, for example. If we say, okay, if 70% of their job is the same, we call it the same thing, and then you can write on the notes, you can write and take in account that in Sweden this is working like that. But otherwise, if you divide it too much, you're not finding back anything. So if you look at the word theater, it can mean the building, it can mean the art form, but it also can refer to a company, or it can refer to an action. So that's all different concepts. On the other hand, Teatro alla Scala is the same concept as La Scala, in the way that's how people call it. And some theaters have 20 different names. or have historical names that are, they used to be called differently, because often theaters are called also to the name of the company that's playing there. So that means that we can have, we choose always one title, let's say, one title that represents this item, but we can have 20, 30 aliases. That's even with people so, because especially if you go further back in the Middle Ages, Renaissance, Baroque, often people wrote their name in different ways. Nicola Sabatini is with a C, with a K. It's also called just Sabatini, with one B, with two Bs. Probably somebody called him El Maestro, whatever. So we can put all these aliases there, which makes it easier to find things back. It's a bit the idea. So, but this thinking in concepts is a bit difficult. On the other hand, it helps a lot in a multilingual environment. Because in a multilingual environment, it's sometimes, well, sometimes you get these odd things like a lot of the terminology in Belgium comes from French. And in French, at one point, you have the director, and the director at one point split out in two parts in history and becomes on one hand the director more or less as we know him now, and on the other hand, the head of technical services. And the technicians, because in the beginning the director did everything. Now the funny thing with language is that in France they kept the word régisseur, which is director, for the technicians. And they called the new function of the director in the sense of setting up the play, they call that metteur en scène, the guy that puts things on stage. While in Belgium they did the opposite thing. They called the director in the sense of putting things on stage régisseur, and they called the technicians technicians. So you see already the confusion, but if you put that in concepts, then it's clear. Because then everybody understands in his own language what it means. And you will also see that the names in other languages are different. Good, so concept basically, often they call that things. Things, ideas. It's something that, it's so wide that you can't hardly define it. The important thing is they are unique. They are unique in two senses. They're unique because that's the description only fits one series of things. And in database terms, they all also have a unique identifier. If I say theater and it's a building, it will have a unique number. And this number is only used for that. The nice thing, language independent, we can describe them, we can give them a nice description that's understandable for everyone, that explains what the concept is. They can have multiple aliases. And it can be concrete things like a spotlight or a theater or a person, but it can also be abstract things like a method on how we do things. How do we make the end of a costume, for example, or how do we make a special effect? That's not a physical thing, it's a way of doing it, and that's also possible. In design, for example, is there, on one hand you have the physical design in the way we put things on paper, but the design itself is something abstract, it's an idea, it's a concept. So, but that's also possible to describe that in this. So it's kind of it's a bit of a complex model, but once you get into that, it helps a lot in keeping things a little bit organized. And then, so we have all these concepts, and then we can give all these concepts properties. We can say this theater, that is a building, and then you get an item, and it refers to a value, and the value is another item, which says a theater building. You can say it has a specific shape, so you say this theater has shape horseshoe, for example, for the shape of the, it is designed by an architect. So there you refer to other things. On the other hand, if you have a date, you're not referring to something else, you just say this is the date. That's kind of a type of text file. Has an address, the same thing, the address on its own is just a text, and it doesn't matter what there is. It also means I can put whatever there. I can write it wrong. it will stick there. While the advantage of working with these items on the other side, if I say it's this architect, because I'm not rewriting the name of the architect, I'm linking to an existing architect. It means that I will always write his name in the same way. Even more, in fact, I just say it's this unique person, it's this number. And that helps because you've all worked in Excel probably and make long lists, and after in the first thing you called it costume, and then you called it dress, and then you can't organize it anymore, you can't select anymore. While working with these values, it gets you you're sure that you have in fact you can do that in Excel also. There's little tricks where you get these drop-down lists, and then you're sure that your information is always correct, and that you're not missing stuff if you're working. It can have a city, and a city is another concept. It can have coordinates that is just a series of numbers that tell you where on the map we are. So, and by that you can describe bit by bit in all detail every different item. Most different types have like up to 50, 60 different properties you can have. So you can really go in depth and detail. So they a lot relate to other things. In the way I have this theater building, it refers to the concept theaters. And if you look at theaters, you will see all the theaters that are called theater. It refers to an architect, it refers to a certain shape, which also means that at one point I can say, give me all the theaters that are having this horseshoe shape of house. It refers to the city, which means that I can say, give me everything from the city, all the theaters from a specific city, for example. So it's a bit, you pull things apart to be able to show them in different ways. That's roughly the idea. And the way they do that in Wikidata is with triplets. It's always the same. You have an object, a property, a subject. And the combination of these three defines one of the properties of this object. Sometimes that is not enough. Because sometimes, let's say, I say the theater is destroyed. Then the problem is that, yeah, okay, I also need a date, and probably it's destroyed twice or 3 times or whatever. So then you use a statement in a statement, and you say, this theater is built by that architect at that point of time. And then later on, you probably have a second architect that finished the work, and you can have a second point of time. Or you can say starting then, ending there. So it gives you some limitations, but it gives you, on the other hand, a fantastic way of describing the reality. And it also forces you to describe it in a more objective way, which is kind of nice. In the way, I often get Excel files back from people that give me lists of theaters, and then they have these nice columns, and then sometimes in the column say, oh yes, by the way, you should have this. And then that's the type of thing you want to get out of a mass database. Is that should be a note, but not in your data. So that's the extra information. And then it looks a bit like this. Now I put 2 things next to each other. This is the thing in Wikidata, which is less structured. And then you have the canon base where we already have some tricks to get things organized. But basically it's roughly the same information, but we try to structure it further. And now we're working on a way more structured way. Because we're for the next project, we're working on a full layout. That is where the layout becomes more important to improve the... we use what they call controlled language, which is basically we define terms that we say, if you say costume and makeup, and you say crépon, everybody knows what that means, and they can see in their own language what that means. While sometimes otherwise they would write crêpe or crépine or whatever, while it's the same thing, then you can't organize anymore. And now by creating all these lists of different materials, for example, you always link to the right thing. That's quite an important The queries are a method to analyze data, so you have all this information. Even if we show it in a specific way, you can always try to show it in another way. You can say, give me all the theaters that are between 150 and 100-year-old, and that have a seating of at least 1,500 people. That's something that we don't have, but you can create that yourself just by writing a little criterion, and that's why these data sets need a query before you get the output. And then you see there, it looks very technical, but after a while, this is the code you use for this. You can open the query thing, and then you write some code, and then you get a result, for example, this list. Now, in practice, you hardly ever write this code, because there is examples of code. You enter the example and you adapt it a little bit to what you want to see. That's a bit. It takes you a couple of days to really get into that, but it's an extremely strong tool. And the nice thing is, depending on the information I show, I can show it in different ways. Because now it's showed as just a dry list, but if there would have been GPS coordinates in there, I could also show it as a map. Or I could show this one I showed as, this is the same information here. It's about how many of different types that are in the, this is the accurate figures from yesterday. So we can see, if we look at theaters, there is now over 15,641. So we're still going. But I can also show this information in this way. So here you see that theaters is the most we have. Magazines, we have this in English, magazines are way less. Creative works are less. Equipment is that, theater companies. So you can basically see, you can show it in a way you want. If there is related information, you can have this kind of star thing where everything relates to everything, then you kind of get a mind map. You can make graphics, whatever. And you can do that all yourself based on what you want to know. So that's a bit the strength also of database. The big advantage of this whole system is it's extremely flexible. And that makes it extremely useful for this practice-based research. And the way we started with 12 properties. There's now 250 or something. We started with 12 and we started to put in information. At one point you think, oh, I can't get this information in. I need a new property. And then you make a new property, that takes you 2 minutes and you continue working. And so bit by bit, this thing, in a traditional way, you would work 3 years with an IT expert, and they would analyze all your needs, and then they would program a thing, and then they would make an online version of that, and then the whole thing is finished. And they say, now here's your database. And then you start working and think, oh, I forgot one. Then it goes back to the IT guys, you have to wait a year, and then they update everything, and then you can continue working. With this system, it takes me 5 minutes to put something extra in there to check if it works, and then you can. So it's an extremely flexible thing. That's a fantastic thing. It's also a terrible thing. Because it could become a mess quite easily. In the sense, if I have a property that is maybe not well described, and somebody else thinks, oh, I miss a property, which is in fact the one I had, they will make a new property, and then you get conflicts. So yes, it's extremely flexible, it's fantastic, but if you work with a lot of people, you also need a lot of moderation. That's a bit. It's pure data, it's hard to read. If you don't have a layer on top of it, it's hard to read. The nice thing is it's a universal structure, that's fantastic. But on the other hand, it means you don't have logical order and so on, so you need to add some stuff in that. It's open to use for everyone, but it also means that you have to protect it and maintain it, because it has happened with databases that suddenly you were working on a thing and suddenly there were 5,000 extra items in it, which were all porn films, because that's what hackers do. They try to crash your database with masses of information. So you have to protect on one hand, but keep it open for everybody to work, and that's always a difficult. Now in our case we solved that with, you can't change anything if you don't have a login. And mainly logging goes to students, to teachers, to researchers, and to professionals in the field that want to work on it. But we're not opening it to everyone, because then you get also a lot of mess that is not useful. If somebody really wants, they can ask, and then they get a login. That's not a problem. If we know you have a good reason to do so, fine. So it's open, and you need a bit of understanding on how it works. It takes you like a day to really get into the system, and it helps a lot in looking first what's already there, to understand a bit how we structure things. But if any one of you would be interested, or would need a part for writing a thesis or whatever, or is interested in adding stuff, because for example, a lot of the information comes from the research we have been doing. One of the things I'm very bad in is costumes. I have no clue about, well, I know you put them on and off. That's more or less where my knowledge about costume stops. If at one point people would be interested in working on that part, you're very welcome. Let us know, we have a chat, we can give you a training, and then you can work on that. That's perfectly possible. If somebody says, I'm very interested in Italian companies, in manufacturers, for example, fine, join the club. We help you to set stuff up, and then you have somebody from school in the Czech Republic now that is working on all the Czech manufacturers. So if you want, you can use all our information, and if you want to put your information on there, that will be a fantastic thing to do. Good. So we harvest information. I got back somewhere, I'm not sure why I got back. Scraping the websites, and then an important thing is that you need to clean the information. So we scrape a lot of stuff, but you need to clean it. Because often, for example, theaters are written, the measurements are, and then you get a sentence. That's the thing you have to split manually. That's the thing that is not working otherwise. More and more, well, we are working on tools to clean information. Because often, okay, a city like Hoboken, for me that's evident, that's in Belgium. Turns out there is at least 7 Hobokens, because there is also a couple of Hobokens in the US, and there is one in Germany. That's things that the machine can't see. So that's things that we have to clean up and check, but we're developing tools to make the checking easy. So, for example, is that if you use a wrong item in a property, we make kind of a list of things that are possibly wrong. You don't need to go through everything, but you just get the list to check things. And then there is another thing, I didn't talk much about that, so we describe these things, but often the information comes from sources. And instead of just giving a source reference, like it's from that book, if the book is available, we will, on the side of the book, we will upload the book, and then we will say, this book, for example, mentions this theater, mentions this person, with a page. So you say that it mentions that theater on page 12, mentions that architect on page 14, mentions that technology on, and it's also reversed, so it will then give you a source. And if you click on the source, you go directly to the right page in the source. That's the idea. And because we're more and more kind of scanning books, now we're still doing that manually to tag them and to say, okay, this is information we have and so on. In the future, we also want to develop a model that is able to analyze, for example, a book. And I must say it works rather well, because if you ask, for example, give me all the names of theaters in there, give me all the names of persons, give me all the names of equipment, we're around 85% accuracy. So you need to check, but it's quite okay, and it helps you to go way faster. We want to do the same thing with magazines. There's a bit more complex, because it first has to recognize where the article starts and stops, which is sometimes annoying, because sometimes an article, the last part is somewhere else in the magazine. But it recognizes already the author, it recognizes the title, if the designer is not too creative in its layout, because then it messes up a bit. So annotating sources is extremely important because then you also know where it comes from. In the sense that you can start linking sources together. And we're working on that type of tools now to improve the whole thing, to make it more workable. This is a nice example. We started with one book about theater fires, 300 theater fires in the world. And we added that in, and now we started looking for more, and you'll see that there is a lot of different theater fires, fires in theater, remembrance of the life of a technician. You must be a bad technician if he writes mainly about fires. There was more a technical book about prevention from the 1890s, also referring to a lot of theater fires. So after a while, we get a whole series of different sources about theater fires. And we tag them so that we can see, so we tag them in the theater. In the theater we say, as burned down at that date, with that reference. So after a while we really could make an overview of theater fires. And that's, I think I said that earlier. So you see, it starts quite low, and then it gets up, and then suddenly it has a huge peak. That's where we all use gas light. And then it goes down, we have electrical light, and here there is an anomaly, and that has to do with your information is only as accurate as the sources you have. And this is about this really peak. We didn't understand first, but basically that's the Second World War. And so it tells you something in the thing, but in the beginning the second peak was not there. It's only when we started to work on the, not the Brand collection, but the Albert Speer collection. Suddenly this peak occurred. Now the Albert Speer collection is a complete crazy thing. It's in 1930, Albert Speer was the architect of Hitler. And in 1935, he set up a commission, and they had to document all the theaters in Germany. Because he wanted to make a book with all the theaters with a technical description and the whole thing. So this commission worked for a couple of years, and then around 40 he said, well, stop the work now because it's not a priority anymore. One of the guys took all the documentation they had gathered, which was 40 boxes or something, took that to his home. The problem was after the Second World War, it was not a good idea to say, hi, I was part of this commission. Not a good idea. So it stays on his attic, and his grandson, when he cleaned out the house of his grandfather, found this and thought this is interesting, and went to the Architect Institute. And it's amazing because it's not only documenting all these theaters, it's documenting as a snapshot, because the information is all from the same year, as a snapshot. And on top of that, 5 years later, most of these theaters didn't exist anymore. So it's really a unique documentation. They worked for 2 years in scanning everything and putting all that together. And we used that then to link to all these theaters and to get more information on them. And sometimes you need to have a look, because it would be as well possible that the grandson thinks all these old boxes that are 30 years in the attic, I just throw everything away. That would have been just as possible. And sometimes you find things back. Last week we did a fantastic discovery. We have one of the associate partners of the project. He's a manufacturer and is a sales and rental company. But he was a distributor for a lot of brands. And at one point he took over a company, I think in Germany. At the end they closed down the company and centralized everything in the Netherlands. But he brought with him the whole archive. And it was all kind of boxes. And we said, oh, it would be interesting seeing what you have. And we were looking into that and said, well, you know, these 4 boxes, that's not interesting for me because it's about ABB and so on. They start to have a look. It turns out it's all documentation from Siemens from 1910s to 1930s. Documenting every installation they made for theater equipment. So every theater where they put a light board, there is pictures of the light board, there is pictures of the theater. And that archive has been there for 40 years untouched. If we wouldn't have asked this, probably at one point they would have thrown everything away. So what happens now is we take we can have them, we're gonna all scan them, we're gonna all document them, we're gonna all put them in. But it's, well, like 4 boxes full of files, so that will take us a while to get all that done. But it's fine. And often it's just, if people start to see that you're interested in it, then suddenly they say, oh, please take it with you. And that's a bit my advantage, because I have, well, over the years I think I trained 5,000 people in all kind of different constellations. And they all know my interests. So on a regular basis I get now these phone calls like, we're cleaning out the archive, would you like to come and have a look? Yes, please, thank you. My wife is not so happy with that, because my archive is getting, well, it's almost in the living room now. But okay, you need a hobby. But just to say that by documenting this book, and it's often all the information is there, but you have to bring it together in a way. And I think that's the main point, is nobody is able to read all these books separately if that's a side effect of, let's say you write about safety, you want to say something about theater fires. You're not going to read all these books and analyze them, because that's in the side. But now you have all the information together, or if you write about the specific theater, you can see in the theater all the details, because the books also refer to the details of the fire. How does it happen? What did burn down? What happened with the audience? What was the legal consequences? Whatever. So, but you're not going to look that up if that's not the core of what you're looking for. While if it's available, then that makes people, and it's also a bit of the vision of we should build on each other's work. In the way, you know a lot of stuff that I don't know. I know a lot of stuff that you don't know. If we can build on each other, we will create better and stronger things. That's the whole thing. If I think, no, I keep all this information for me, okay, it's not a help for you, but it's not a help for me either, because I'm not getting more information either. And I'm a bit, is there a polite word for that? Fed up with a lot of universities that more and more kind of close down the circle around their information while they're funded with public money. I said, can I have this? Yeah, we don't know, because we still go and we want to publish this first. And he said, yeah, but I'm not going to publish it. I just want to see what you have. If I ever need it, I know where to find it. Yeah, but still, it's a bit. And on the other hand, you have a lot of stuff that is there in archives that is not accessible because it's not documented. I know there is a fantastic archive in the City Archive of Antwerp, which is the archive of the police of the theater. So they had a specific police service for the theaters. And the reason was, just like you used to have firemen that you needed to have in your theater before you were allowed to open the theater. There was a period of time where they were very scared for revolution, because we just had one, because we created our own country. So you weren't allowed to open the theater if not at least there were 2 policemen in the house. And these policemen had to make a report every day, but there's not so much happening in theater. So a colleague of mine could see them because he was looking for something else, and he secretly, they let him in and have a look. And it has reports like, oh, she was singing very false yesterday again. Yes, the audience was throwing with tomatoes and so on. But the moment they started to throw with hard stuff, we had to interfere. Things like that. Oh, this actor was drunk again, and they had to wake him on stage, and the people was a bit loud about that. That's a fantastic source, because it tells what happens in the reality, and it's not accessible. I know it's 25 boxes. It's not accessible because no archive will give you so much information, because they don't know if you're messing it up or taking parts away. So they will never allow you to do so. But that also means that we not have access to all the information there is. And that's a bit sad. So the more we can open up to each other and the more we can link it to each other, the richer it gets. And I get to at the end, I will get to how we're going to do that, at least in the future. So we connect a lot of sources to a lot of objects, and in that way, you get kind of rich information about it. You basically put everything together, and then if somebody wants to dig in it, I didn't read all these sources. Often I just know it's mentioned there. But if somebody wants to dig in one specific subject, at least they have a good thing to start. It's a bit like, I try to explain to my students that in Wikipedia, the most important thing is not the text. The most important thing is the sources that are at the bottom, because there you can go and dig deeper into the subject. And it's not, well, I had to explain that earlier, and now I have to explain, like, it's not just the first paragraph, it's also the rest of the text that is quite interesting, and the links to other stuff. And I have to explain that books are these square things with white papers in it that they put in libraries. Okay, that's the thing that happens, but anyway. So these sources can help you a lot and can give you different insights, because often they are from different moments in time. There's one guy that did a tour and visited a lot of theaters when he was young in the 1800s, and then there is somebody that describes the history later on, and somebody describes the history 100 years later with a whole different view on this history, and by bringing that all together, you get a strong image. Things that were very exciting that's what you often see in technology is a thing is extremely exciting in the beginning, because wow, we do something new, and after a while it becomes a normal technique, and then it becomes special effects, and then it disappears again. So depending on when you look at it, it will give you another view. And of course there is some subjects where we really go in depth, like with the canon stories. There we also gather information, individual information for one topic, because you're really researching that and you go in depth. And imagine that we would all do that. That we all, when we research a specific topic, we would add this information there. We would get kind of a huge common knowledge base that everybody can use. I told you before about theater words. So theater words is a dictionary. Now the last version is already from, I'm not sure, that's ESCO, let's see, 2013 is the last version that we have. And they stopped publishing it. Which also means that some of the terminology is not accurate anymore. But on the other hand, we didn't want to lose this, because it's a valuable source to understand how people call things in a moment. And there we got the idea of also entering historic language. So this is quite a nice example, I'm not sure. The auditorium attendant. So this is what you get in all the different languages from the theater words. And then this is a very modern description from ESCO, which is the European database of occupations. And then we start looking at old dictionaries. So this is a description from 1835 and from 1885. And so we look at different dictionaries, and we add this information as historic language, which is kind of nice, because in some of there is a period in time where a dictionary is a very cynical thing in the way they make all kind of allusions on, and the ouvreuse, so the lady that opens the boxes in a big opera house, there is a lot of stories about them. Okay, and now we just say it's the woman that opens the doors in the opera. But in that time they say, well, officially her function is to open the doors and the boxes. But it's possible they deliver other services. And so that makes clear, like, okay, we don't want to say what's happening there, but there is something happening. And then if you start digging into this occupation, you see that they did deliver other services, but not in the way that most people think when they read the sentence. But it was more like they could give you a place next to, let's say you're looking for a husband, they could put you in a box just next to the box of a gentleman that was looking for a wife. And they could kind of tell you, oh no, don't talk with this person because she's in trouble with whatever. So they would kind of give you background information. It's kind of the normal use of Facebook. So they would help you in getting the right. They would also help people with business contacts, because what we see now, an opera is a nice place, and you have all the boxes, and often you have this kind of second box there. Now, originally, and that is the last time I was there, still in the Teatro Nuovo in Verona, the second box was owned by private persons. In the sense that the sponsors of the theater that helped to build get the money together to build the theater, in fact, they bought the box, and it's their ownership for life. And the funny thing is, so you're not allowed in the boxes during the performance, but of course, if you do technical thing before, you can go in. And then you have this one box, it's perfectly restored in the original condition. The next box is painted completely white, very, very modern, with modern paintings in there. The third box is stayed in kind of brown and orange type of 60s colors with 60s furniture. And it's their private box. It's their private living room. And even we did a very modern dance performance there at that time. Some of the people came to sit in their box, didn't even bother to look at the performance, but that it was kind of their meeting place where they could have a chat with people and so on. So if you look from that type of concept, it starts to be understandable that these oeuvres have all kind of other functions or to get you a good place, or to get you in contact with your favorite actress, or whatever. But it's not the fuzzy thing that we think now if you read the sentence like that. So dictionaries can be very interesting. Good. What's it now? Shall we have a break first? Yeah. Is that a good idea to have some fresh air? For the last part, there is a lot of information online. One of the issues there is that a lot of these collections, well, they're struggling in getting into a digital era, in the way a collection is, what we do is different from a collection. A collection is collecting artifacts, whatever they are. And then they expect researchers to make the links, which means that for them, a picture is a picture. Whatever is on there, they will describe a bit what it is, but it's not in a structured way. So that makes it very difficult for us. So often it's text-based. That means that it's a lot of work to get it linked. Often their structure is rather confusing, and because it's based on a logic like it's in that box, in that room, more than different types of objects together. Often they're not really linkable. So you have a page of a collection and you think, I want to link to that. And then it turns out that it's a general address and you can't link to a specific page. And they're very hard to search on, especially if you want to do that with an external search. So we're trying to convince them a little bit to get more accessible information. But that's a slow process because, of course, they have already done 50,000 items. If they have to change everything, that is rather problematic for them also. For technical documentation and the equipment, I've already said, it's often the documents are not dated. Information about technical equipment disappears extremely fast online, because the moment it's not sold anymore, most of it is disappearing. So that is really a hard thing to really get it documented. We're trying to get now manufacturers so far that they send us copies of their old information, so we can gather that. And that's a bit the idea we have in the long run is, now we are looking at old sources to document something. While, well, every day there is one more day of history, in the way yesterday, technically speaking, is history. So if we can document today what we are doing, what there is, then we have documentation the next day about yesterday. And that's a bit the idea. Can we find ways to document in a way that we don't need to document anymore, but that it's just part of our normal working? But I get back to that at the end. But that is quite an issue on a lot of things. Physical collections are more and more at risk because these people are old, and because museums and collections more and more have to select what they want to keep. And they have to get rid of all the rest. And sometimes they have this terrible thing which is called weeding, which means you go to all your paper files, and if you find a double, you kick it out. The idea behind that is good. But I get to one example that we had in Kortrijk, where we found the original bits when they built the theater. They asked different companies to, okay, what offer can you make us to do that? And we find two files that look identical. So in a normal situation, they would have kicked out, but the museum never got so far to go through these files. When we started looking at them deeper, it turned out it's two almost identical files, but 3 weeks distance from each other. The first file is what the technicians wanted, because they wanted a lot of stuff and a lot of things to play with, and a fantastic theater and so on. And then 3 weeks later, probably after they have said we can't afford that, you got the realistic thing what they finally got. And that is an amazing, interesting part of information, because it tells us, okay, that was the ideal situation, that is what you really needed. And that would probably have got lost if we weren't there in time to say, wait a second, these are two different things. So that's one of the things we are fighting a bit. Another thing is, well, a lot of these collections have pictures, for example, of the traditional pictures they made in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, actors on stage in their costume and they're standing there, and they document which are the actors that are there. They're not documenting the spotlight you see in the back, which means that we have to go manually through all pictures if we want to recognize a spotlight in the back. That's one of the things we want to try to use photo recognition for in the future. That we can go through a digital collection and pick out also where we can see technical equipment, for example, or where we can see workers for the theater that are in but anyway, the physical collections, it's a problem because they take a lot of space. There is no money to keep them, so we hope to find a solution for that, but it's still a problem. The digital information, it's amazing how much that is gone. So based on all this, we started, this is a lot of, what I talked before is a lot of thoughts that we got when we started working on the Canon 2 project. And the Canon 2 project, again, a European project, now less focused on education, less with students, and more on research, and we have more researchers working for us. So what we still want to do is this collaborative, multilingual, visual, open link data source. And we extend our field. Before we were only looking into technology, we extend our field to design, which is rather a challenge, I must say. We want, in fact, to become a hub. And when I say these collections are just doing objects, that's fine, because that's their job. But we see it as our job is if we can connect all these collections in one team, it would be good for them, it would be good for us. If we can combine this, then you really create a hub where, if you're interested in this field, to get there, which means it's for learners, it's for researchers, it's for professionals, people that have a collection, and also the general public if they're interested. It should be open for everyone. And the idea is that we kind of create a level of detail depending on the group. If you're just looking at the website without logging in, you see all the basic information. But if you're a researcher and you have a login, you can go deeper and see more stuff and see. That's a bit the idea. So one important thing is that we realized after the first project that we needed a nicer layout. And it's not, the site as it is now is not very attractive for an average person to go to. It's a bit boring. It has only one color, as you said. So we want to have a more visual interface, and that also where the layout more shows you what type of things you have. A second thing is that we want to create a lot of tools. the third thing is that we are testing structure for documenting design. And the fourth thing is that we are creating manuals on how to document stuff. Because often people have stuff, but if it's not documented in the proper way, let's say you're a designer, you have a lot of stuff, and then one of the people from a collection said to me, well, if somebody dies, we know that 2 weeks later the family is there with 3 boxes and says, this is the archive. And that's nice. The problem is, it's all documents. And there is pictures there. It doesn't tell you what production it is, who are the people that are in there, what was it the original design, where is it made. Nothing is documented. And sometimes it's organized in a way like pictures together, design documents together, and often the sketches are not even mentioning about which production is going. So, and that's for them almost an impossible task to get the structure in there. While if we could help people in documenting design when they are designing, it would be way easier, because the moment you're designing, you know what the name of the production is. So once the production is running, you know, I take everything together because you know all these sketches, you put them together, and at least we know what the production is. And if you would put some dates, imagine if we would put some dates on our sketches, we would know in which order they were made. Because if we say document design, we don't only want to document the result. We also want to document the process, because the process is often way more interesting than the final result. Not that the final result can be very good, but from a research point of view, the process to get to this final result, where do you get your information, how was the process what was the collaboration with the other designers, what is the collaboration with the company, with the director, and so on. That's very valuable information for us that you need to get in one way or another. So we're working on manuals to document design, and we're updating also the manuals we have on how to document equipment. So in the previous project we had a set of help pages on, okay, how do you measure a spotlight, for example, so that we all agree that you make the size of the 2 outer points and not the house. Give a simple thing. How do you, what information do you need from a spotlight? All that type of stuff. So we're kind of updating also these manuals, that you know, if I have a spotlight and I document it in that way, and I give them the spotlight and the information to a museum, they know what to do with it. That's a bit the idea. We're working on making it more collaborative. And one example, if I look at the spotlights, for example, there is quite a lot of people that have their own small collection. And often they have stuff that is also in my collection or in the German collection or whatever. Normally you should research every piece of equipment that you have, but that's a bit stupid to do because I already did that for my equipment. So we developed a system where we describe a type, and then you describe your unique piece, but you don't need to double up the information from the type. That means that for some of my spotlights I just can say, oh, it's this one. And I don't need to, I only have to say, well, it has a mark on that it comes from this theater, and it's damaged there. Because that's about the unique thing. But the rest is already documented. And then there will be others that I have to document in detail. But the next one will profit from my work there. So in that way, we would make the work a lot more efficient. Now our big question was, how do we get people so far that they want to document their work and add that to our database? Because people have a collection because it has a kind of ownership. And if they put it somewhere else and it's not, well, then it's like we have it. So one of the ideas we have now is we create iframes. And an iframe is kind of a page that you can put on another website. So if you have a collection and you put it in our database, in return you get an iframe that you can put on your own website. So for example, we're going to document in a couple of months' time 2 or 3 theaters in Flanders that all have this little cellar where we pick out the interesting equipment, and we're going to document that. They get an iframe and can put that on their website and say, look, We have this heritage function, we take care of this heritage, and so on. That's good for them. On the same time, it's very good for us because they reach another audience that can get interested in what we are doing. So it's kind of a win-win in working together. And another thing that we want to do is support people in this documenting process. I've done 2 months ago, for example, a guy that had about 110 spotlights. And if you have to do that on your own, it's a terrible long process to do. So we went with 3 people and we made kind of a conveyor belt, where the first one took the spotlight, cleaned it out, put a pen on it. The second one put it on stage and took pictures from it. Then it went to a third one that took the measurements. And in that way, it was really fast. In 4 or 5 days' time, we documented the whole collection, including packing it and everything. So that's really fast, because if you do that on your own and you do 5 spotlights a day, you do good work. So we try to support them, and we try to support them in how to get it imported and stuff like that to get things going. We also realize that, so that's one thing, is we want to create engagement. A second thing is we want to get a better user experience, because for collaborating, if you get a better user environment, people will be more willing to add information. Now it's all kind of a bit technical, and I know, yes, sometimes you have to go refresh the page and then it works like that, because it's an experimental thing. Now we really want to go to an interface that is more usable for other people, and that it becomes easier at least to get standard information in there. And we need to create kind of a community in this. So to give you one idea, this is on the left side you see a source collection, which gives you, and of course these books are in my collection. But if you have the same book, the only thing you have to say, it's also in my collection. And at that point, you will get your collection in an iframe on your website. The same with technical equipment. Okay, this is my unique pieces, but they're linked to the information of the general information of the pieces. So that makes it a lot easier to, and we try to get kind of a standardized way of getting the pictures in there, that it's more visual and so on. And as you can see, is that, okay, you have this collection, but you can organize it by type, by brand, just by collection number, or by importance. So that gives you a little bit of functionality in your own website, and you don't have to do anything. For us, is the advantage that we get a larger volume of things that are documented. Good. There is some issues, because at the end it's quite complex systems, and that has to do with the different types of information we try to gather. So you can't do everything in forms that you just have to fill. So what we're trying to do is to have basic forms where you can, let's say 90% of the information you can put in there, and the last 10% then you really have to go in the database itself to update that. We have to train people, and more we need monitoring. The more people that are working on it, the more and more we need monitoring that that the information is correct. But we created tools for that. This is, for example, a tool that says, okay, give me all the properties that are used for documenting a person. And then you can see, this is weird, because there is a person that has building data. That's probably something that is wrong. And then it's quite easy to correct them. So we create tools that we can go to all the information and see, okay, but what is wrong? Where did somebody made a mistake, and how can we update this mistake? Which is way easier than go through every record and check if it's correct. And it's that type of things that we are developing. Canon 2 is more on digital, but especially the extension to lighting design and to set design. Which means that well, we have to describe a lot of new types of concepts. in the way you have the production has individual performances, the production is linked to a theater company that needs to describe on a certain level, and then you have to describe the design as a concept with the different stages in it where you see the documentation. Okay, that's the ideal situation, but I'm working now, for example, on a lighting designer where the only thing I have is her website that is already disappeared because she died 6 months ago. I have her website and thumbnails of her work. That's it. And what we do with this tests is we look at, on one hand, we look at the designer like that where you have very limited information, but at least you try to give something. And on the other hand, we have the collection of Henk van der Geest that for every production has piles of papers like that. With all, he has the light plots, so it's a touring production, he has the light plots of every theater he has been playing in with this design. So you see all the variations. So that's the other extreme. We have all these mood boards, we have all the annotated theater texts, everything. And by testing out, on one hand, somebody where we have hardly anything, on the other hand, somebody where we have a lot of stuff, and then another thing is somebody that is still alive, where we want to document their work. So it's not like we try to document now thousands of designs, we're trying to figure out, like with 5 different cases, to cover kind of all the possibilities you could have, and then give a manual to people to document or their own work or the work of somebody else, or we probably continue. But what we're doing in this testing phase is really a proof of concept, where we try, does our system work? Is our system adaptable enough, flexible enough to document all these type of variations? Designers, because we talk now about the designer's archive, in reality, often their parts of their heritage is in different places. They've designed a production here, so probably there is a part of the design here. But they designed also in an opera house. They also designed for a private company. So these are in these different archives. Their communication sometimes is somewhere else. Part of it is still in a private collection. Part of it is split out. So often their archives are in 20, 30 different places. And what we try to do is to show that if you link them all together, then you get a real good image of. The question is, of course, is why do we document that? Because there could be different reasons. One is just to keep it, to be sure that for the future it's kept. That's one thing. But then you're not doing anything. Our idea is that it should be inspirational for new designers to have a look on how did they work, how did they solve that problem, how did they create that effect. So in some cases, we're not documenting all the equipment that is used in a design, for example, because that would be endless. But what we do is, if you say, okay, but this guy designed and had, as kind of core of his design is a wall of Swoboda lights coming backwards. At that point, we will say, okay, but this was significant equipment for that design. So we kind of limit ourselves. We're going to not document every spotlight, but we're going to document the very specific things. So we work on lighting design, we work on set design, but for set design we kind of cut the subject in 2 parts. Lighting design is quite clear because that's the moment you start creating with light. Everything which is before is just technical. But for sets, because you have all these standard, what they call stock sets, where you just went to a theater and said, I need a forest, and I said, we have 3 forests, I pick that forest, but give me 1 tree of the other. There we consider it not as a design, but as set pieces. And set pieces is just like spotlights or cables or stands. We describe them in the same way. And then you have what links to the production, which is a specific set. So what happened was they wanted a set for a Midsummer Night's Dream, for example, and then they combined that from existing parts they had. So we're documenting the separate parts, we're documenting the whole, and we can link the whole to a production. But you can use the same stuff for another production. And in that way, and it's that type of things to figure out how does the structure work, that we are experimenting. Does it work if we conceive it like that? And for stock sets, we do have kind of a serious number of information that is in a very rough shape. Often they have take pictures of everything, and now we have to figure out which picture fits. To make it more interactive, we hope to kind of make a virtual theater, an empty virtual theater on your screen. And then you have a menu where you can say, okay, give me all the trees. And you can kind of drag the trees on stage. That's the idea. And then you can create your own set based on the stock sets. That's a bit the idea. If that's going to work, I don't know. In a way, technically it's possible, but if we manage to do that within the project, that's a different story. We're going to do experiments with that, but it's quite possible that we have a rough version and that in the next project we will say, okay, now we know what we want to do with this, we're going to make something that is publicly usable. And that's always the way we work. We want to do a lot of stuff, we promise way less, because otherwise we kill ourselves. But we try to do that, and sometimes we're not in a stadium yet to make it public, but to work further on it. So, and that's the whole idea of this practice-based research, where you continue working on it, and you get new ideas, and so that's a bit the focus. To give you an idea, what you see here is one of the 6 sides of the barn of Peretstrom, and every circle is a spotlight. That gives you a little bit of an idea. The second one is Confidenzen Theater. And what you see there is a set lit only by candles. The problem is I can't show you that on a picture because your eye is not adapting now. So if you are there, the whole trick is that you come into the theater, and the theater is pretty dark, and you sit there so your eyes get used to less light, and then we light the candles, and then the whole theater lights up. So that's quite an important thing. For those who love to travel, in June there is a conference there, which is called Conference by Candlelight, where we're going to discuss a lot about historical lighting. And we're also going to work on that collection there. Good, so we're reviewing the interface, we improved the visualizations, and we were looking at better searchability. Can I improve if you search something to find way more? So the interface this is still a rough version because it's not colored yet, but it will now order the information next to each other in different blocks. It will give all the time information together. It will give all the geographical information together. It will give you all your references and your sources together. We're still playing around a little bit with it, but that's a bit the idea that we would have. And you would do, because we have pictures from at least 6 or 7 different sources. So some come from Wikimedia, some come from their own website, some are uploaded, some are sources. And we are working now on a system where whatever the source comes from, you will also see it together in one thing, which sounds a very normal thing, but is technically rather challenging. And it will also give you all the works where it is mentioned. So the difference between sources and references is other databases where you can look at. The sources are really books or text or whatever. So that's what we are working on. We are improving the timeline in the sense that the standard timeline that is in Wikidata is not really meant to be very flexible. It's good, but you have to change the queries, and we want something that you can just change on the screen. So we developed a new timeline where you can select part of the time, where it gives all the core data, and then under that it gives you all the other information about people, about the city, and whatever. So that's a thing that is in progress and that will be new. we will work with forms, and for example, we already have a copy function now. Before you had to retype. If you have two identical things, you had to retype it completely. Now you can copy it. And we're working on a lot of ideas of using AI, but in a limited environment. So within our repository, or within a folder that you have yourself. And we're thinking on image recognition. So because we have documented a lot of spotlights, for example, with pictures, it means that we can say, okay, have a look at this picture I have here and compare it with all the pictures of spotlights. Which one is the closest to what you have? And then probably after a while we will train the model so far that you're able to recognize them. Or stock sets, there are identical stock sets in there, or comparable stock sets. We're looking for logos because that's very easy to, if you analyze magazines to find back the publicity, then you try to look at the logos. But logos change over time, so we're looking at that. We're looking at analyzing text with AI, but within this closed environment. And we created this separate repository, so the box where all the documents are and the pictures are. And for example, now you can search for a name in all the magazines that are in there, which is pretty, you're working on a theater, you type the name of the theater or the name of the city, and you get 10, 20 magazines that wrote something about this theater or something about this city. So it helps you to find the right sources within a limited set of documentation. And that is a real improvement. We're also going to look at if we can really look in every field of the database, which is not what databases are made for, but we'll find a way to do so. So there we are really working. Repository with all the backup functions, and that's a bit of a technical thing. But at the end, it will help researchers to faster find what they need within a specific field. That's our hope. Well, I just did a test. If I looked at Milan, then I found like, okay, that's a Belgian magazine, that's another Belgian magazine, that's all German magazines that are just text, and then a couple of product catalogs, for example. So a product catalog from 2013 says that they have put new ADB dimmers in La Scala. So it helps us to get, if you start to understand how to search in that, it helps you to get information that you wouldn't expect, and that you wouldn't expect from coming from public searches, for example. That's a bit the idea. We're still working on it, and we will be working on it for the rest of our lives. In the way we always find new things that could work better, that could, and bit by bit we build. And that's the nice thing, is because this system is so flexible, we can do that. If I would do that in a traditional way with a traditional data manager, it would cost a fortune, it would cost a lot of time, and probably we would not be able to do it. Because this is kind of a building block thing. You put an extra block and you see if it works, and if it doesn't work, you throw it out. That makes it great. So it's a way more flexible way of looking at it. One more thing we do is, often if you download a picture from the internet, after a week you can't remember where it came from and who the owner is. So in our repository, what we do is we put a lot of metadata, so data about a picture, about the text, who is the owner, what is the copyright, when is it made, whatever. We put that in the repository. The problem is, if you download the picture, that's gone. So what we're working on now is, first of all, if you put the picture in there, it will look at, is there any metadata in the picture? Because if you take a picture with your phone and you go to see the properties, you will see where is this made, which camera it is made with, and so on and so on. So what we do is we will load this information for as far as it's useful for us to our metadata, add extra metadata like who has the copyright and so on, and then write it back in the picture. Which means if you download the picture, you use it for something else, and you open the properties, you will know who the owner is and what the copyright is. That helps a lot. So that we're working on that because we get pictures from all over the place, and often you find them somewhere on a website and there's no information about them. And it's a bit too much work to say, okay, can I please? So often the balance between ethics, where you should know from every picture where it comes from and who owns it and so on, and the reality that you have to do some work is a very difficult question. That's a reality. So we try to do that as good as possible, but we're also trying to make tools that make it a lot easier to do so. Because once I've done and put all this metadata in the picture, the next step is that if you upload it to the database, that it will give you automatically all the metadata. So you don't have to do anything. It will say picture from this person taken there and so on. So we don't need to do. So once this picture is done, whoever uses it should be able to retrieve this information back. An extra thing we do there for accessibility is we put for every picture, we put an alt text description in the metadata. And an alt text description is basically if you're blind, for example, you go over a website and you pass a picture, it will tell you what's in the picture. It's a function in most websites that if you add this visibility issues, you can say, I want to, so you get a description of the picture. Okay, if you have to do that when you're making a website, that's very hard. If you can do that when it's in the repository, you only have to do that once. And if you take this picture and put it in your website, it will automatically give you this old text version and a description. So we're trying to find all this type of tools to make life easier if you work together to get stuff in a proper way. So that's quite an important thing. We created, now it's still a rough version, but so you can download upload 300 pictures, and you can in advance already give all the core metadata. So you don't have to do that for every picture. You just say, I'm the owner, this is the copyright, and so on. Then you upload all the pictures, and they automatically will get, and then you only have to go to the details, like what is exactly in the picture, but you don't have. So we try to speed up the process of documenting, and you can also change batches of information and search on the metadata. So what we do, for example, also is that you have a project. You can put the project, let's say you're working on the costumes of a specific production. You give that the project a name. You add that on the metadata, so then afterwards you can say, give me only the information that is about that project. Even if you work with 5 people together, as long as they say it's this project, then they can just see each other work, but eliminate all the other information that is there. It's that type of tricks that we try to improve, and to be honest, sometimes we are very surprised that nobody else has ever thought about this. In the way, often that seems a thing like, oh, it doesn't matter how much time it takes to upload stuff or so, while we really try to focus on that. So, getting back to design, how do we grab design? Because the big problem is, how do you grab a design? Because it's an abstract concept, it's an idea of someone. That's basically the design. So we are really looking into how do we do that, what information do we need? And then there is a second question is, how do we store this information that is still useful? In the way, one of the big issues is that often we work with software now, which is a fantastic thing. We can have a 3D theater and we can put lights in there, and then we put that in the lighting computer and we can program that and so on. But this visualization software, how do we know that in 10 years' time we're still able to read these files? So there we're really looking into, can we put them in a format that is usable in the long run? It's a bit, with text we know that There is specific PDF types where there is almost a guarantee that we will be able to read them in the future because that's the standard for digital conservation. For visualization, that is not. One of the parts we're thinking of is to move them from our visualization into a gaming environment, which sounds a bit odd. But the reason is the chance that a gaming format survives is 1,000 times higher than the visualization software. Why? There's way more users, and you have all these freak gamers that keep old formats alive. You still can play all the games that were written for DOS, which is 25 years ago. You can play them. Why? Because they created platforms to keep them alive. So one of the options would be to transfer your design into a gaming environment, which can be fun, because then you can play yourself. But also, this would be kind of a format that is way more long-lasting than what we are using. The same with show files. We're looking into, can we rewrite a show file just in text? We know that would be for a simple production about 1,000 pages of text. The idea is not that we can read this text, because that would be hopeless. But if you have it in a basic text format, you always can write some software to bring it back to an actual show file system. So with that's the technical things we are thinking of is how do we keep this? I can't read my own files when I started working, and I started quite early drawing digitally and so on. I can't read them anymore. There is no way, there is no software anymore, because it was this obscure, that's a quite typical thing. You have this obscure company that starts doing that, and is fantastic in that. And then another one steals it and becomes rich with it. They never got rich with it. And that's often the thing, is they're very innovative, and then somebody else takes over the idea and they get rich on it. So that's completely disappeared. I don't know how to read them anymore. And that's quite an issue. So we try to avoid that. And in design, the balance between what you can put in data and what you can need to put in text becomes more important, because design is also about feeling, it's also about context. So there we will be also more be writing, but we're trying to develop kind of formats on how to write and what to write, so people that want to document know more or less how to write stuff. So when we're modeling design, you get also this. This is the first drawings on how to model design, and with comments and so. And after a while, it gets kind of a structure. But that's all work in process. The difficulty is that, okay, we talk about the play, but what is a play? Is that the idea, the concept that the writer had? Is that the concrete text, the play text? Is that a variation on the play text? Is that a translation on the play text? Or is that the annotated version of the play text that the director has made, where he scratched some lines, or he put some extra music in, or whatever? So that's one of the things that we are looking in, and they all could be important in the way you want. The idea of Hamlet coming from Shakespeare, well, in fact not from Shakespeare, because originally it's an Arabic story, but that's a long, we're not going to talk about that. But his idea, and then the text, which is not one text, but in his case it's several versions of the same text. Then you go to the actual translations often in different languages, or the actual interpretations, and then you get to what the director has done with it. So we try to kind of map that, so you can keep track of this. But that means that we need to rethink a lot of structures. We first wanted to have a separate header design, but then we started to realize, in fact, a design or a play, it's all a creative work. So the design, a play, a circus act, a sound design, whatever, they're creative works. So now we have a header creative works where you can put all these different elements. And that has to do with how to create a standard language, but also if I want now a new type of, because video design is not in there, for example, if I want a new type of design with this structure, I just add video design and all the rest stays the same. It will treat all the other parts exactly as the same thing. So that's a bit how we try to deal with that. The thing about the stock sets I thought about before, the whole idea of where does data stop and text start. We're still working on the documenting of objects, but way more in detail, because we've done a lot of tests, we've done a lot of experiments with different types of collections, some already more or less documented, others are literally a stack in the corner of a theater. And by doing so, after a while, we kind of created a methodology on, okay, this is a good way of doing it, this is what you need to measure, this is what you need to look at, this is what you have to describe, this is what you have to research if it's missing, whatever. So we're trying to document that now, so we can give it to somebody else, and then they can document the collection of their theater. So we don't have to do that all ourselves. We also want to go further into this with, for example, 3D scanning. And 3D scanning not only from the outside, because that's rather easy, that's known technology, but we also want to see spotlights from the inside. Because that's often for us the most interesting part. How does it work? And now I have a colleague that is working in immersive space, and he said, well, if you make a proper scan from the inside of a spotlight, I put that in my immersive room, and then you can walk inside your spotlight, which seems kind of fun to do. So we're testing all these types out. A last thing, we've not talked about that a lot, is capturing the use. In a way, I can describe the whole technology, but for a light board, I want to see somebody using it. And I want to see how they program it. So there we want to work to a setup where you have a light board and you have a very professional guy that knows exactly what it is, that is kind of telling about his work on his light board, is showing all kind of functions, and then with the visualization software next to that, so you can see what's happening when I make use. And in kind of an interview type of style, where we record on one hand the guy just face to face, but we also look at the console, how he works on the console, and we record also the image. And we're trying, well, the challenge is we want to make a camera set for that. And the requirement was it has to be cheap, and it has to fit in a backpack, and it has to be high quality, which is an interesting challenge, because the idea that you just have a back, you go on a plane, you go somewhere, you talk with a guy for a couple of hours, you try all these things out, and then you have recorded it. Another thing we want to do, we're experimenting with different types of interviews. For designers that are alive, we're trying to get, well, not a standard interview, but kind of a guideline on how to interview a designer on a specific piece, on his whole career, whatever. We also would like to do that in the future with craft people. In the way we were talking about, for example, costume people that have very specific techniques that can get lost in the future. And there is more and more interest also in what they call intangible heritage. It's the heritage that is in our crafts and in our. So if you could document that, at least we know how people did that. It doesn't mean that we can just copy it, but at least we have an idea on how they made these type of things. How did they make light? How did they make costumes? How did they construct sets? How did they do set painting? Set painting is really an art that is getting lost. In Belgium there is one girl that is trained in Hungary that is still able to paint the traditional sets. In the Netherlands there is nobody anymore. In Germany there is still some. So that's an art that is getting lost, because we don't make so much painted sets anymore. So we should try to document that before the last painter is dying. So you understand I still have a little bit of work to do. So that's the documenting part. For design, we're talking about scanning sets, something on modeling stock sets so you can show them. Trying to document everything with sources from the concept until the final realization. Ideally also recording the performance, so the whole thing, including the interviewing, so you get an overview of what is this whole design. And of course you can't show a light design without showing the set design. So there you get an interesting combination that ideally you would interview two people. So that's what we are working on. We hope that in a year's time we will have the first version of a manual that we can spread around, and then people can have a look. Can I work with that? Can I document this myself? So we're more and more focusing on collectors because we realize that we can't do everything ourselves, because that would be endless. And we're also focusing on designers and professionals. And there, that's a bit the last thing I would like to talk about is what could you do as a professional in helping this history out? And we're trying to, well, there's two things. One thing is you can say, okay, at one point you need to document your whole collection. And I know if I ask that to designers that they are kind of thinking like, this is so much and I can't remember it and I don't know where I left it, and they never do it because they're working on the next production and so on. What we are looking at is, and that's basically a technique that comes from administration, is that instead of documenting something afterwards, that's bad luck. Yeah. Instead of documenting something afterwards, if you would make your process like that, that it's documented already when it's finished, that would be way more efficient. And that wouldn't be such a big difference in working because we make these documents anyway. The only thing that would help is that you would store them in a proper way, in a certain structure, that you would annotate them at least with a date, a version number and the production of it. And that at the end, the only thing you would need to do is probably select it. Say, okay, no, this was really bullshit, and that's another version of that, but it doesn't bring anything else. But if you could do it like that, then you would automatically document your whole career during your career. And that would make it way easier for future collections to get information in. I think that's one of the messages we have. If we're not going to do that, we're going to lose so much information, even from famous designers, because we don't have the means to do this all afterwards. And there the question, that's one of the things we're looking at also with this Opera Europe, so the umbrella organization of the opera houses in Europe. In the past they made kind of a very rough system where they just had a folder system where as well the administration as the technical department, as the designers, as the composers, everybody has his folder to put his stuff in. It's a bit of a simplistic, old-fashioned type of doing this. But on the other hand, it works and everybody can work with it because it's just putting your files in the right place. So we're looking at would something like that be possible, maybe in a little bit more advanced way, that you already put it in a repository and then you link to it. That's a little bit more. But the advantage would be for the designer that he also could use that to show his work on a web page, for example, and say, okay, this is the things I want to show. Can I put that on my website? So I think that's an important thing, and that's for designers, but it's also for craftspeople. It's also for the painters and so on. Is it helps to document your work. It's getting also more the concept of a portfolio, which is rather an American Anglo-Saxon thing, becomes also in the rest of Europe more and more important. Because there is more people, we have more going from one country to another, so being able to show the work you have done becomes more important.
So I think it would be, well, in an ideal situation, you would start at the school documenting your work, so you get already the habits of documenting everything you did. We try to do that with our students also in their practical work experience, in what they do outside. Is okay, if you run a performance, at least put the name and the date and so on, that after a while, and then if you have to make a CV, you can select what you want to show. You don't need to show everything. But if you can do that, at least it's documented for the future. If enough people are doing that, again, you can reuse a lot of information. Because you don't need to describe the production, because that's described already somewhere else. So you only could focus on your work, and the context would come from the overall. So I think that's one of the things we want to experiment with, if it would be possible to already put your work in before you're dead, which would be nice. And that you can use it in the future, and that it's also used within your production process. So that's the thing we are thinking about. So we try to do that, and well, one of the things we need to do is build trust. Is people that are trusting that their information is safe, that we're not doing strange things with that we only make public what they want to make public, and so on. But also trust in the long lasting of the environment we're in, because, well, I can say that all these other collectors are old and are going to die, but at one point I will die also. So what we try to do is make a community that is big enough that if somebody disappears from the community, that the community can keep the whole system alive. That's a bit the core thing. And I think that's one of the best guarantees to keep the thing going. We're trying to get other collections to use it, so we have one big collection which is cheaper, which gives us more possibilities to develop new tools and gives us more access to the information. And we also have our backup plan that, well, first of all, we can make a data dump in the European, there is kind of a collection of data, things that are made for research. We can dump it there, but we also can put at least 80% of our information into Wikidata also. So with every transfer, there is a little bit lost. The main information would stay there. So that's a bit what we're working on in the community, and therefore we talk on trade shows, we talk on gatherings of museum people, we talk on gathering of professionals, to get kind of a common view on this, because it's not our thing. It should, well, it should be our thing, not my thing. Let's say that. So what can you do is keep evidence of your work in the way that's often what we take a lot of pictures and then we lose them somewhere. It's good for yourself to at least have kind of a folder structure of the productions you've been working on with some pictures. But also, for example, the poster of the production, so you have a reference to what production it was. If there is recording, that's fantastic, because that's all primary thing. It goes directly to what you can't keep your work in a way. If you're sculpting stuff, that's way too big to keep. But at least you can keep a picture and the drawings and so on. At the same time, kind of employment documents, because they support that you have done that. That's more for the CV part important than for the document on its own. But it also helps that you see, okay, I did this in this function. Keep news articles or links to news articles. And there, an important little tip is that often if you see news, then it has kind of a strange URL. But often they have somewhere a permanent URL. If you keep that, there is a good chance that it links way longer. And the second thing is, from every piece of information I get from the internet where I think it's important, I also print it in a PDF and keep that, because 95% of the information of websites at one point gets lost. So having a backup copy that gives you the date also when it was there and so on. And having a little bit of structured records in the way the folder structure is one thing, but just keep an Excel file with all the things you did and in what folder they are helps a lot if you afterwards want to go more in detail. It also helps that not all your pictures are called nice picture, which is often the case that they have, okay, nice picture and nice picture 2 and nice picture 2b. Try to describe what's on there. Often what we do is, well, you need at least a year of when something happened, you need the name of the production, and we want to know what is to be seen in this picture. If you can combine that in a nice name for a picture, that helps a lot. And try to figure out which formats you use your information on that are at risk. For example, if you have a 3D drawing and at the moment there is no standards in keeping them, at least make some basic views that you put on a PDF, on a print. Okay, then you lose the functionality, but at least we have a record of your work. So that's the kind of little things we think will work. And if you want more information, you can reach me here. Good. Is there any questions? Is it all clear? So you're all going home now and you start documenting everything you have done in the past. That's good. No, that's a bit exaggerated, but I hope that I have triggered a little bit the idea, like maybe I should keep a little bit of my work, because well, if you don't do it yourself and you keep it yourself in a safe place, and ideally you keep it back and stuff like that, but that's the general knowledge. If you keep a little bit yourself, if you don't do that, nobody else will do it for you. And we don't know that some of you will become very important designers in the future. And then you would lose them. Often people don't have anything from the first part of their career, because they were technicians, or they were just working, or they were just assistant designers and stuff like that. And then suddenly they become important, say, do you have something of your past? And it's all gone. If you do that in a smart way, you can use it as well for job applications, for making your CV, for making publicity for yourself, and having an archive in one little box. And that's the ideal situation. That you're not, well, it doesn't make sense to only make an archive as an archive, but it does make sense if you want. Imagine in 5 years' time you become an independent worker and you want to have something nice on your website. In 5 years' time you have no pictures anymore of what you did now. So in that way it helps a lot in starting with it now. I know it's frustrating and the sun is shining outside, but if you put that as a part of your working process, it's not more work. That's the whole thing. It's like bookkeeping. If you do that good in the first thing, it's not a work at all. If you have a shoebox with little notes everywhere and at the end of the year you have to pick them out, then it's a big job. So that's a little bit what I... And for the rest, I hope you enjoyed it a little bit on this rainy Saturday. And I hope to see you back somewhere, or if you have questions afterwards, or you want to use something, or you don't find information on a specific subject, or whatever, you can always contact me. And if I'm not responding fast enough, you just have to send a second mail, because sometimes it's a bit overwhelming. But then I recognize a mail coming back, and then I know, oh, I forgot something. That's the reality. I'm honest in that. Sometimes it just scrolls off my screen before I even have seen it. So then push me a little bit. So, thank you very much.